He set fire to the important math answers. The professor rushed to put it out, risking himself. Seeing his awkward state, Will felt a bit uncomfortable. For a genius like him, this problem was as simple as 1 plus 1, but the professor could never reach Will's level. He regretted that this young man was wasting his talent. In fact, Will had his reasons for doing so. Before meeting the professor, every morning, Will needed a friend to pick him up, and they would go to the construction site to move bricks together. At night, he worked part-time as a janitor at MIT. One day, he saw a math problem on the blackboard and easily solved it. He didn't realize it was an advanced complex equation, and there were only a few people in the world who could solve it. Initially, the professor was dismissive, thinking it was just a student's prank, until he saw the completely correct answer on the blackboard, making him instantly realize that another genius had appeared at the world-renowned MIT. The professor had previously promised that whoever could solve this problem before the end of the semester would not only receive the highest grade but also have their name permanently remembered at MIT. Unexpectedly, it was solved in just one day. The next day, the usually quiet math classroom was packed. Everyone wanted to see what this math genius looked like. But when the professor asked him to stand up, no one responded. The helpless professor had to issue another challenge. This time, it was a math problem that he and his colleagues had spent 2 years solving. Meanwhile, Will, upon seeing the guy who bullied him in kindergarten, got out of the car without a word and, with his buddies, beat up the bully from his past. Even after the guy was knocked to the ground, he didn't stop. The patrol officer rushed over to intervene. In his emotional state, Will even kicked the officer. Eventually, although released by the police, he was charged and would be in court in a few days. However, he wasn't worried because such things were routine for him. That night, seeing a new problem on the blackboard, Will didn't think much and directly provided the optimal solution. Just then, the passing professor saw him and thought the janitor was causing trouble. The professor hurried over to stop him. Caught, Will quickly turned and left. The professor wanted to catch up and give him a good scolding, but unexpectedly, he lost him at a corner. When he returned to the blackboard, he was surprised to find that Will's answer was spot on. Afraid the professor would report him, he resigned from his job. Usually, he just hung out with his friends, and all 4 young men had eyes that unmistakably revealed a deep confusion about life. The next day, the professor followed the trail and found the janitorial department, where he found Will's contact information. At that time, Will was in court facing trial. He didn't hire a lawyer because he knew the U.S. Constitution by heart. With just his words, he left the opposing lawyer and judge speechless. Various historical cases of acquittal became Will's evidence in court. Clearly, this wasn't his first time standing there. The professor, witnessing the scene, was immensely impressed and couldn't hide his admiration. However, this time, Will wasn't so lucky. The judge took several minutes to review his criminal record: fighting, theft, vandalism, impersonating a police officer, and assault. Surprisingly, all these charges had previously resulted in acquittals. This time, the judge ignored his testimony and directly sentenced him to jail with a bail set at $50,000, and he was not allowed to appeal. If no one was willing to help, my bail and countless criminal records would make him spend his best years in prison. Fortunately, the professor was willing to lend a hand. He offered Will a deal he couldn't refuse. Under his supervision, Will could be released, but there were 2 conditions. First, he had to solve math problems with the professor every week. Second, he needed to see a psychologist weekly. Although Will was resistant to seeing a psychologist, it was still much better than being in jail. Once out, Will didn't disappoint the professor. No matter how difficult or complex the math problems were, he could provide the optimal solution after a brief moment of thought. The professor was very pleased with his mathematical abilities. However, the psychologist part was a headache. The first psychologist barely exchanged a few words with him before Will exposed his sexual orientation, almost causing the psychologist to have a breakdown. It turned out Will had read his biography the day before and, from his language and behavior, confirmed his orientation. With just a few words, he infuriated the psychologist, who stormed off. The professor then arranged 4 more psychologists for him, but the results were the same. They all left in anger. In desperation, the professor had to turn to his college roommate, Sean. Sean works as a psychology teacher at a school. He originally didn't plan to take on any therapy cases, even though the professor kept emphasizing that he was a rare talent. Sean remained indifferent until the professor mentioned that they came from the same area and had similar childhood experiences. Only then did Sean agree. Seeing yet another new face, Will still showed no friendliness. Ignoring the 3 professors who stood to greet him, he plopped down on the sofa, just wanting to get this so-called therapy over with quickly. Before Sean could even start speaking, Will took the lead, inspecting the entire room. He either gave irrelevant answers to Sean's questions or found ways to avoid answering them altogether. Seeing the books on the shelf, Will remarked that they were all trash. Sean just agreed without saying much. Will became increasingly rude, then went on to say that Sean's words were also trash. Sean didn't mind and humbly asked for advice on what was wrong. It wasn't until Will mentioned his wife, saying he married the wrong woman, that things changed. This seemed to hit a nerve with Sean. However, Will seemed to find a breakthrough and continued to speak disrespectfully about Sean's wife. Unexpectedly, Sean grabbed Will by the neck. Will was startled by this, as previous therapists had at most lost their temper, but Sean directly expressed his anger. Will's plan succeeded once again. Seeing Will's smug look, the professor knew that this therapy session had failed again. But surprisingly, Sean didn't give up and requested to continue at the same time next week. In one aspect, Will was indeed right. He said Sean was in a violent storm, with waves crashing against a small boat, and the oars were about to break. He desperately needed a harbor to escape his current situation, but that was just one part of Sean's life. On Thursday, as soon as Will walked in, Sean suggested they go outside to talk. They then went to a park and sat by the river. At first, Will was as cynical as before, but Sean's next words touched her soul. "You're just a kid who speaks without thinking. When it comes to art, you might spout some superficial opinions from art books, but you can't describe the smell of the church in those books. When it comes to women, you might list some exaggerated preferences, but you've never experienced the happiness of waking up with family by your side. When it comes to war, you might easily discuss Shakespeare's sonnets. But I've never felt the sorrow of a comrade dying before my eyes, nor the pain of losing a loved one while watching helplessly. Even though I've read No Orphan Alone, I still can't sum you up with book knowledge. Unless you're willing to open up, I can't truly know you." For the first time, Will felt truly understood by someone who spoke to his heart. Yet, Will didn't easily give in. During one therapy session, Will became silent, and Sean didn't say a word either. Now, he had to wait for Will to speak first. Every session ended this way, until one day, Will couldn't hold back and told a joke to Sean, who was about to drift off to sleep. His attempt to break the ice was actually a way to seek Sean's advice on matters of the heart. Not long ago, he met a girl at a Harvard bar. He remembered that night when Will's friend pretended to be a history student to chat up a girl, only to be exposed by a local student. The student used his knowledge to challenge them, turning the lively atmosphere awkward. That's when Will, unable to stand it, stepped in. He stood between them, first repeating the student's points verbatim, then reciting the curriculum, assignments, and even the syllabus for the next few years. The student wanted to argue back, but Will interrupted, stating the student's points before he could. He even remembered the exact page numbers. Everyone around was stunned by Will's words. However, the student's Harvard degree was his last offense. He mocked Will, saying he'd end up a street vendor. Will directly suggested, "If you're not happy, we can take this outside." That one sentence snapped the student back to reality. He quickly retreated to his corner. Will easily diffused the situation, catching the girl's attention. 45 minutes later, as he was leaving the bar, he told the clueless guy, "I've waited for you for 45 minutes, and you did nothing." Skylar proactively gave Will her number. As Will was heading home, he saw the same guy hitting on girls at a dessert shop. So, he walked up and mocked him, saying he was only fit to eat donuts there, while he had already gotten Skylar's number. From then on, Will started dating Skylar. He experienced the taste of love for the first time. But to maintain the perfection that Skylar presented, he didn't dare to schedule a new time with her. Even when he called in the rain, he hung up without saying a word. Sean thought Will was a complete outsider, and his so-called maintenance of Skylar's perfection was actually just to avoid ruining his own perfection. In Sean's view, it's a philosophy. Never interacting with anyone can indeed preserve the perfection of a first impression. Then he told Will a joke about his wife, who farts when she's nervous, especially at night. One time, the sound was so loud it woke up the dog in the yard. After waking herself up, his wife blamed everything on Sean. Sean's words made them both burst into laughter. Sean knew all his wife's little quirks, and she knew his as well. People call it imperfection, but that's not true. No one in the world is perfect. The question is whether two people can be a perfect match. Will asked Sean if he ever thought about remarrying, but Sean deliberately avoided the question. Will turned Sean's lecture back on him, saying, "You can be like me, not interact with anyone, and live the rest of your life freely." At that moment, they miraculously reached a certain understanding. Sean didn't respond but simply said, "Time's up." This time, Will lost track of time during their chat, but he still took Sean's advice, opened up, and went to Skyland's school, taking the first step. Unfortunately, he still had homework to do. He planned to meet Will again tomorrow, but Will couldn't wait. He finished Skyland's homework at lightning speed, then returned to the dorm to give it to Skyland. During their date, Skyland asked about Will's family. To hide his identity as an orphan, Will lied, claiming he had 12 brothers. Skyland planned to meet them. Faced with this, Will had no choice but to agree. At the next therapy session, Will asked Sean what his life would be like if he hadn't met his wife. Sean deliberately misunderstood, thinking Will was asking if life would be better without her. Sean answered seriously and thoughtfully, standing up and speaking with great emotion. He recounted an important baseball game, and his passionate demeanor moved Will. That epic battle left a deep impression on him, but Sean's next words left Will in disbelief. Sean had missed the game because he met his wife. He gave up that rare opportunity to enter. Yet, even so, he doesn't regret it. He doesn't regret missing that game because of his wife. He doesn't regret giving up therapy because his wife was ill. He doesn't regret the years spent with his wife after she fell seriously ill. Sean's correct outlook on life left Will in awe. At the same time, it brought the two of them closer together. Meanwhile, Will's work at MIT was going very smoothly. The math problems that others found impossible were simple for him. Seeing Will's improving state, the professor approached Sean, hoping to discuss Will's future plans soon. Many places were eagerly waiting for Will to showcase his mathematical talents. However, Sean felt the timing wasn't right. The professor was a bit too eager, wanting Will to show his talents as soon as possible. Even though Sean firmly opposed the professor's approach, he had already arranged job interviews for Will. What he never expected was that Will's friends went to the interviews instead. Meanwhile, Will was out having a good time with Skylar. Whenever Skylar wanted to meet his 12 brothers, Will would come up with various excuses. He feared that once Skylar saw his shabby little house and his pitiful gentlemanly demeanor, she would break up with him on the spot. Even with a genius mind that surpasses everyone, Will couldn't escape the deep-seated inferiority complex within him. Sometimes, he was extremely sensitive inside. Even a casual joke from Skylar could make Will's nerves tense up. His inferiority complex gave him a mental burden. He began to suspect that he was just a toy for Skylar, a transitional boyfriend. His genius, poverty, and legend added some color to Skylar's life. But as a rich girl, Skylar would eventually abandon him and marry a successful man. Then, they would share jokes about him late at night. So when Skylar suggested that Will go with him. When it came to moving to California for medical school, Will decisively chose to refuse. He was afraid of change, afraid of moving, because since being abandoned by his parents as a child, he had been placed in foster homes 4 times. 3 of those times, he was severely abused. Deep down, Will found the idea of moving terrifying. But what he feared most was that over time, Skylar would discover his flaws. Then, he would once again be unloved, once again abandoned. Unfortunately, Will couldn't express any of this. Skylar thought Will was too concerned about his money. However, Skylar lost both parents at the age of 13. Every day he wished he could give back the inheritance just to have one more day with his parents. The difference was, Skylar chose to face his life head-on, while in contrast, Will was a coward. He was afraid of not being loved, but wasn't Skylar the same? At least he was honest about it. This led to a big argument between them. In the end, Will turned and left despite Skylar's desperate pleas, leaving Skylar alone, torn apart by love. He couldn't believe how easily Will said those 4 words, "I don't love you." The next day, a professor questioned Will's latest solution. Will simply told him it was correct. When the professor learned Will hadn't gone to the interview, he expressed his dissatisfaction, feeling unappreciated for all he had done for Will. An indignant Will began to fight back. To him, these problems were as simple as 1 + 1 = 2, and he didn't need anyone's guidance. He didn't need anyone to control or pity his life either. Saying this, he set the answers on fire and tossed them on the ground like trash. The professor desperately lunged to save them, unable to watch the precious answers burn. He often wished he had never met Will, so he wouldn't feel so humiliated. But what he regretted more was Will's waste of his own talent. Thus, the relationship between Will and the professor completely broke down. During another therapy session, Sean asked Will if he had a soulmate. Unfortunately, this hit a nerve with Will, who had just pushed Skylar away. He tried to bring up great figures who had passed away. Clearly, he didn't have a soulmate. Sean used this to encourage him to take the first step in opening up, hoping he would realize what he truly wanted. Sean understood that he didn't go to MIT just to clean floors, but was driven by something inside. However, when he asked Will what he really wanted, he resorted to his old tricks, dodging questions and giving perfunctory answers, claiming he just wanted to be a shepherd. Hearing this, Sean didn't want to waste another word and got up to show him the door. Will couldn't understand why Sean was acting this way. Whenever he felt uneasy, he would turn into a defensive hedgehog, lashing out at everyone around him. But Sean had seen through Will long ago. He was the same with Skylar. He was always hiding things, never being straightforward. Before Skylar left, Will called him again. Skylar told him, "I love you," once more. Will was happy because he loved Skylar too, but in the end, he couldn't rise above himself. Skylar couldn't understand any of it and left the city in disappointment. It felt like everything was back to square one. Will thought maybe it was okay to live his life like this, at least his heart wouldn't get hurt again. When his friends found out that Will not only skipped the interviews but also didn't have the courage to keep his girlfriend, they gave him a heartfelt talk. "If 20 years from now you're still working construction with me, I'll kill you myself because you have $1 million lottery ticket that you're too scared to cash in. I pick you up every day, we go out drinking and messing around, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the best moment of my day is those 10 seconds when I park the car, walk up to your door, and hope that when I knock, you're not home. No goodbyes, just leave quietly to do what you want, to realize your potential." Will was stunned into silence. When the professor found out Sean had sent Will away, he was incredulous. It meant Will would continue wasting his days with his old crowd, but Sean knew better than anyone. The main reason Will wasted his talent and let himself go was that he found friendship this way. The friendship of his 3 best friends was the only support and acceptance he had in the world for years. He was abandoned at birth by those who should have loved him the most. So whenever he sensed someone might leave, Will would push them away first. It was a defense mechanism, and it left him lonely for 20 years. The professor thought pushing Will would only lead to the same outcome, but he didn't see it that way. He refused to let Will squander his talent. But Sean couldn't stand by and let the professor ruin Will's life. This led to a heated argument between them. As their argument escalated, Will opened the door at just the right moment. When the professor saw him return, he immediately calmed down, turned around, and left without a word, leaving time for them. Will, having heard the content of their argument, was very grateful for Sean's actions. Sean was holding a file on Will, which contained photos of him being abused by foster families during his childhood. These deep-seated fears constantly controlled him. It seemed Sean had a similar experience. His inhumane alcoholic father would come home wanting to be violent. To protect his mother and brother, Sean would deliberately provoke his drunken father every time. So he understood what Will's childhood was like. Will's heart finally opened a crack, and he began to share those tragic experiences with Sean. After listening, Sean started to get closer to Will step by step. At the same time, he repeatedly told Will, "It's not your fault." Initially, Will was still very resistant to the idea. But after Sean said, "It's not your fault," over and over, he finally broke through Will's psychological defenses. Then, he collapsed on Sean's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. For 20 years, he had never cried so freely. With patience and courage, Sean helped this troubled soul find the right way to open up. His energy didn't bury his talent, but it erased the confidence he should have had. In his fear, he fired a blank shot, using arrogance to protect himself, and responded to everything with sarcasm and bitterness. But now, someone finally told him, "It's not your fault." From then on, only bright sunshine awaited Will. After a night of reflection, Will accepted the job the professor had introduced to him. He was like an ordinary person, humble, without cynicism, and without pretending to be something he's not. Just like that, Will's therapy was nearing its end. He was a bit reluctant, hoping to keep in touch with Sean. Sean was happy to, but planned to travel for a while first, as he decided to take another chance on life and find a new beginning for himself. At that moment, they both completed each other's redemption. Coincidentally, it was Will's 21st birthday. Starman had saved up money to give him a big gift, an old car with an ugly exterior but equipped with an inline engine. As for the professor and Sean, both of them only wanted the best for Will and had no deep-seated grudges. The two old friends met, smiled, and let bygones be bygones, remaining lifelong friends. That day, a friend came to pick up Will for work as usual, but after knocking on the door for a long time, there was no response. He peered through the window and realized the place was already empty and spotless. He suddenly realized that the kid had really left. Afterwards, his friend felt relieved because Will had finally left to find his true worth. He was genuinely happy for Will. Meanwhile, Sean was packing his bags to start a journey. Will drove up and looked at the mentor who helped him find himself, feeling full of gratitude, and quietly left a letter in the mailbox before driving away. Sean noticed something unusual and went downstairs to find the mailbox open. The letter said, "Apologize to the professor for me. I need to put work on hold. You could give up a baseball game for the girl you love, and I don't want to have regrets either." Will finally figured it out. He was heading to California to find the girl he had hurt. Good Will Hunting is a drama film directed by Gus Van Sant, starring Matt Damon and Robin Williams, released in 1997. Will, scarred by childhood trauma, learned to hide his vulnerability with rebellion, much like the survivor's paradox in psychology. Those who endure hardships often become smarter and more perceptive, but this sharpness also makes them more sensitive to pain. The film uses Will and Skylar's argument to reveal the truth. True intimacy isn't about solving problems but allowing the other person to see your cold sweat and scribbled mistakes while solving them. When Will finally hugged Sean and cried, we understood that true healing isn't about erasing wounds but allowing someone to touch the flesh beneath the scab. The confrontation between the professor and Sean mirrors the polar extremes of modern education. The professor's lab is filled with trophies but can't accommodate a broken heart, while Sean's counseling room has only 2 old chairs but can hold the world's loneliness. When the professor shouted that he was wasting God-given talent, Sean's response was deafening. Maybe. God doesn't care if he can solve partial differential equations. Just like Harvard University's holistic education philosophy, true growth isn't about accumulating knowledge. It's about helping someone rebuild their trust in the world within a safe relationship. The most touching part of the film is when Will ultimately chooses to chase love instead of a math trophy. This isn't a betrayal of talent, but a loyalty to his full humanity. As Sean says, imperfection is the good stuff. It lets you choose who you let into your world. The open road at the film's end brings tears to many eyes. It's not an escape, but Will's journey after 5 therapy sessions, 3 broken mirrors, and being pushed away twice by a lover, finally learning self-growth, the self-worth shattered by his family needs. A 3,000-mile drive through dust to be pieced back together. Just like existential philosopher Sartre's declaration, man is a product of self-choice. A friend's line, "I hope one day I come to find you gone," reveals the highest form of friendship. True fulfillment isn't about holding on, but watching someone move towards a broader world. When we, like Will, learn to live with our trauma, those cracks once seen as flaws become the places where light shines through. The film acts like a prism, allowing each viewer to see their own reflection. Perhaps it's the timid soul hiding behind talent, or the anxiety trapped within authority's framework. Or maybe it's the lonely one yearning for love but bristling with defenses. It tells us that life's greatest adventure isn't solving a math conjecture on a blackboard, but daring to say to someone, "Help me." The most precious freedom isn't escaping the past, but moving towards the unknown with scars, still believing that the next stop will have open arms waiting. Well, that's it for today's movie discussion. Feel free to like, comment, and share. And I look forward to our next encounter.